back to the family house. The house lay quietly in the dark, like a ghost in the middle of the Massachusetts countryside, surrounded by vast fields, where the lights from nearby houses could not penetrate the thick darkness. Emily's house exuded a cold, deserted atmosphere. The scene inside the house was quite empty. The weak light from the dim lamps seemed to highlight the silence of the surrounding space. The old walls, the thick pale blue curtains, and the cold air made people feel like time had never passed here. Emily stood in front of her parents' door, sighing. She felt an indescribable emptiness when she returned to this house. Everything had changed, but at the same time nothing had changed. She stood still for a moment, not wanting to go in, as if she was struggling with herself. Memories of her innocent youth, of waking up peacefully in this house, now haunted her mind like ghosts. She locked her car and stepped inside. An indescribable feeling of unease rose in Emily's heart as the door creaked open. It was a familiar sound since she was a child, but now it rang out like an inevitable sign that everything had changed. The door closed behind her with a soft sigh. The feeling of longing for a house that was no longer warm and welcoming to her welled up inside, and she couldn't help but wonder, was this still her home? Step inside. The space was silent and somewhat cold. The old lime walls, the old paintings that she had admired for so many years, were still hanging quietly in familiar places. She felt as if there was a mist hanging over the house, as if there was some invisible, inexplicable, yet palpable presence. Everything was as she had left it, but it wasn't. Something was wrong. She walked softly into the living room, where the silver-gray upholstered chairs stood silently, as if accustomed to her absence. Everything was eerily quiet. There was no one there but her, but it felt as if someone was watching her from somewhere in the shadows. Emily could feel the presence, like a cold draft of air passing through the walls. Even hear faint whispers from down the hall. She didn't want to think about it. It must be my imagination, she told herself, trying to dispel the unease that was enveloping her. But as she walked through the rooms, the dim light from the low-slung wall lamps only made the space seem darker. The emptiness in her heart grew, as if the coldness of this house was seeping into every cell of her body. She walked to the stairs, trying to ignore the shivers that ran down her spine. Everything was eerily quiet. Only her footsteps echoed alone, the sound hollow. She paused for a moment at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the familiar steps that led to her parents' bedroom. This house, though seemingly unchanged, was a strange place to her now. Everything here made her feel lost. "I think I need a break," Emily whispered, but as soon as she stepped onto the first step, she felt a strong urge to turn back. The dim light from the second floor above seemed to draw her in, making her unable to take her eyes off it. Even though she knew it was just the weak light from an old night light, there was something strange about it, making her hesitate a little. It felt like someone was waiting for her, a presence she couldn't explain. Not her parents, not her family. Something else. She took a deep breath, trying to keep herself from falling into an invisible fear. "I guess I'm just tired after so long," she told herself, walking upstairs. But she couldn't shake the feeling of insecurity. As she approached her parents' room, the door suddenly swung open, but no one was there. The door opened as if inviting her to enter, and despite the strangeness present, Emily couldn't resist. She stepped in, step by step, cautiously. The coldness in the room seemed to grow, as if there was some kind of threat waiting. She didn't know what she would find in this room, but one thing was certain. The silence and coldness in this house was not something she could easily ignore. Emily knew that something was waiting for her, and it was not a simple memory or imagination, but something darker, deeper, an inexplicable presence. A new temporary life. Emily's life has taken a turn she never imagined. After moving back in with her parents, she finds no comfort in her old house. A quiet suburb with few people passing by. Everything is slow, quiet, and somewhat soulless. She feels like a traveler in her own home, lost and not belonging here anymore. A temporary job at an urgent care facility begins to take up all of her time. Late-night shifts, urgent calls, and exhausting moments caring for patients who have had accidents or urgent health conditions all make Emily gradually become distant from the world around her. Her loved ones, her old friends, all seem far away from her mind. Every day she lives from shift to shift, and when she's not working, she returns to her quiet, empty house. Time passed like an invisible stream. Nothing changed, nothing new. When night fell, Emily often drove home after each late-night shift, alone in the quiet night. She couldn't remember how many times she had driven home in the past weeks, but it was always the same. The road was empty, not a soul, not a sound, only the steady hum of the engine in the quiet space. She felt like she was sinking into an endless vortex that she couldn't escape. One night, as her car rolled through the empty road, she stopped at the local gas station to fill up. This was where she stopped every night when she got home late. The only place that had a bit of life in this quiet space. Tonight, the gas station was the same, only a few cars parked hastily, the neon lights emitting a cold light. The strange noises in the air, along with the sound of gas being pumped into the tank, made the space even more desolate. Emily automatically did the usual thing, withdraw money, pay, and get back in the car. But today, something was different. When she got back to her car, a strange man was standing near the gas station. He looked pretty normal, wearing a thick coat and a baseball cap, but his eyes made Emily feel uneasy. He was standing near the gas pump, but he seemed to be watching her. His eyes never left her, making Emily feel like she was being watched. She tried not to pay attention and walked quickly to her car. But when she got in and was about to start the car, the man suddenly approached. Her car door was only a few feet away from him. At first, Emily thought he might just want to ask for directions or help. But as he got closer, she noticed something strange. He didn't say anything, just stood there, looking at her silently. There was an eerie silence that filled the space. "Hello," he said, his voice soft but filled with doubt. Emily nodded, not knowing how to respond, wanting to leave quickly. But he stood there, his eyes never leaving her. "You seem to be new here," he said, and Emily felt uneasy hearing that. She nodded briefly, not wanting to continue the conversation. But the man did not let go, his eyes still lingering on her, as if he was trying to figure something out. Feeling uncomfortable, Emily quickly started the car, intending to drive away immediately. But before she could move, the man added, his voice somewhat abrupt and strange. "Be careful of things you can't see," he said, his voice a whisper in the dark. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Those words, although not too serious, made her feel like there was something dark, unclear. She hurriedly stepped on the gas, not daring to look back. As the car sped away in the dark night, Emily couldn't help but feel uneasy. She wondered, who was that man? And why did she feel like there was some kind of connection, some kind of warning, from the strange words he had uttered? Even though she didn't want to think about it, the strange feeling still followed her, not easy to get rid of, haunted by the past. Night fell upon the quiet house as Emily returned from her late shift. As she stepped into the yard, a cold breeze blew through, carrying with it an indescribable sense of loneliness. She was not one to be afraid of the dark, but there was something strange in the air tonight, making her feel uneasy. The front door creaked as she opened it, and the familiar sounds of the house seemed heavier in the silence. As she entered the living room, A sudden noise came from outside the door, making her pause. It was a strange sound, soft but clear enough to catch her attention. Her mind was spinning, wondering if it was her parents going out. But as she quickly walked up the stairs, she realized that no one was there. She looked through the door of her parents' room and saw that they were still fast asleep, their faces calm, completely unaware of the abnormality Emily had just sensed. Emily, whispering, "What's going on?" She couldn't help but feel uneasy. Everything seemed normal, but the cold feeling wouldn't go away. Confused, she decided to go downstairs to check, worried that there might be someone strange in the house. She walked into the dining room. The light from the dim lamp fell on the familiar dining table. But as soon as her eyes fell on the space under the table, a cold feeling rose up in her. And then she saw that figure, a man furtive, hidden under the dining table. She held her breath for a moment, her heart beating faster as she realized it was the man she had met at the gas station. Images of that meeting suddenly flooded her mind, the strange gaze, the strange smile that she would never forget. Emily, screaming, her voice choked. "Run! Hurry!" Her scream rang out like a shock, breaking the silence of the house. The man, after a moment of silence, suddenly appeared from under the dining table, walking out slowly as if he had been waiting for this moment. His eyes were cold, sharp as a knife. Emily could not stand still. Panic welled up in her chest, and she immediately turned around, running up the stairs. But at that moment, a loud noise rang out from behind, and Emily's father rushed down from the upper floor. He didn't say anything. Just a strong swing of his arm pushed the man away. The battle between the two began immediately, when the man pulled a knife from his pocket. Her whole family could not let this stranger endanger them. Emily's father put all his strength into his powerful punches, but the other man did not give up easily. Kicks, punches, the sound of objects shattering on the floor occurred in chaos. Emily's father shouting, "Get out now!" The man suddenly brandished a knife at Emily's father, but in a moment of distraction, he rushed in to attack forcefully. It felt like time stopped. The two wrestled with each other, the strange man's hand gripping the knife tightly, while Emily's father punched him straight in the face, causing him to stagger. They hit the table, knocking a plate down, but they didn't stop. Emily's mother from the stairs, panicking. "Protect my daughter." Emily's mother rushed down, holding a baseball bat that she had hidden in the corner of the room. Without hesitation, Emily's mother swung the bat accurately, hitting the man's back when he wasn't paying attention. The man cried out in pain, taking a step back. But he didn't give up, continuing to advance, determined to charge in. However, in the chaos, Emily's family fought together to push the man out of the house. Emily's father yanked him out the door, while Emily's mother slammed the back door shut, preventing the intruder from getting back. The door slammed shut. The room was suddenly silent, except for the family's panting, sweat beading on their foreheads. They looked at each other. No one said anything, but the tension in the air was still there. Emily gasping, shivering. "What do we do now?" Emily's father taking a deep breath, looking towards the door. "We have to call the police right away." But inside Emily, the shivers continued. She looked out the window, feeling that the person was still watching them, and the nightmares were not over. The ghosts from the past still lingered, and she didn't know if her family was safe. Mystery and danger behind the door. The night after the strange man was arrested, Emily's house was no longer as quiet as before. Although the police worked all night and took the intruder away, the false peace of mind was just a thin shell. The whole family could not stop the feeling of being watched, and the feeling of being threatened remained like a ghost that could not be dispelled. The police confirmed that the man had a criminal record for breaking and entering and other crimes. But when they checked his identity and history, everything was murky. There was no clear official record. He was just an inexplicable ghost. In particular, he still had the key to Emily's front door, even after he was arrested. He even left a mysterious message in Emily's room, something that no one could explain. She remembered what he had said before the police arrested her. The man smiling strangely. "You won't be safe until you understand." Emily could never forget the look in his eyes. It was as if he knew things she didn't understand, things no one else knew. Emily's father immediately changed the locks on the front door and put a chair in the door to keep anyone out. However, despite all the precautions, Emily still felt uneasy. Every night she couldn't sleep well, always hearing strange noises from outside the door, as if someone was secretly watching. The feeling grew stronger as the night wore on. Emily, whispering, "What's going on? Why can't we just be at peace?" She began to suspect that the man was just part of something bigger. The strange feeling about him still clung to her, unceasing. Emily began to look for strange signs in the house, things that could not be explained. The pictures in the living room began to have strange cracks, and the old clocks in the house started to stop as if signaling something. She could not shake the feeling of the supernatural that pervaded the house. The more she thought about that man, the more she felt that there was something dark, not just a normal intruder. She realized that there was a strange connection between him and this house, maybe something inhuman. Emily walked into her room, where everything seemed to be the same as the day she left. But today, when she looked in the mirror, she saw a dark shadow in the corner, like a shadowy figure standing watching. She turned around, but there was no one in the room. Emily, trembling, voice choked. "It can't be. It can't be." She turned away, trying to push the feeling away. But the strange man's words kept ringing in her head. "You won't be safe until you understand." That sentence was like a warning, making Emily feel like she had stepped into another world, where peace was fake and threats always lurked behind the door. Unable to bear the anxiety any longer, Emily decided to find out the truth about the strange man, about his connection to her family and to this house. She began searching through old family documents, hoping to find some clue that could explain what was happening. But the more she searched, the more she felt like she was entering a world she couldn't control, and what she discovered would change everything she knew about her family. Meanwhile, the night continued to cover, and outside the door, the strange shadow continued to lurk. New life and strange signs. Emily sat alone in the living room, the dim light shining down on a dark corner of the large room. Outside the window, the pale moonlight shone through the curtains, creating strange shadows on the wall. She looked out, then looked down at the clock on the table. The clock only had a few minutes left until midnight. A feeling of unease suddenly rose in her heart. The wind whistled through the cracks in the window. Emily shivered slightly, leaning back on the sofa. The darkness seemed to get thicker as the night fell. Strange noises began to echo from the corners of the empty house. The sound of light footsteps on the wooden floor, the sound of creaking doors. These sounds had become her companions in the late nights, but never had they made her feel as scared as now. Emily's hands trembled. She tried to push away the feeling of anxiety that was engulfing her. She stood up, walked to the window, looked outside, but saw nothing but the pitch-black darkness of the garden. A voice in her head said, "Maybe I'm imagining things." But the strange signs kept appearing. Emily, whispering, asking herself, "What happened to my family? Why do I feel like something is watching me?" She turned around, her hand on the doorknob, but before she could open it, a strange noise came from the hallway. She stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. Shadows danced in the darkness, as if someone was watching her from far away. Emily took a deep breath, but couldn't shake the cold feeling in her heart. She decided to go downstairs to check. Each step felt heavier, her heart filled with doubt and anxiety. The scene was dark. The space in the house became mysterious. The truth behind the door. Emily entered the basement storage room, where her grandmother used to keep her old things. The musty smell of time and the cold air made her feel creepy. The room was filled with boxes, books, and old items covered in dust. But in a hidden corner, the light from a dim lamp reflected on an old diary. She approached, her eyes confused but curious. She opened the diary. The pages had turned yellow with time. It was her grandmother's handwriting. The words were ugly and blurred, but still legible. Emily mumbled as she read the words on the page. The curse is related to this house. Those who live in this house will always be watched by a force that never leaves. Emily trembled as she turned the pages of the diary. The words gradually revealed a terrifying secret that her grandmother had kept hidden for many years. She read about an ancient spirit, a dark entity that had been trapped in the house for centuries. But the curse could not be broken, so the spirit would always find a way to return, haunting those who lived in that house. Emily, reading, trembling. It can't be. Is this true? Emily's mind was spinning. The strange events of the past suddenly had a terrifying explanation. The strange man she had seen, he was no ordinary intruder. He was the embodiment of a dark entity, a spirit that never died. The shadowy figures she had seen in the darkness were signs of that presence, and the feeling of being watched was no coincidence. Emily felt as if everything was collapsing around her. She stood silently in her room, the heavy diary in her hand. Everything she had believed in, the most ordinary things in life, now became a hazy, inexplicable illusion. And just then, a sudden noise came from outside the room, as if someone was walking closer. She quickly closed the diary, her heart pounding. Everything was now changed forever. The battle with the darkness. The house was filled with a heavy and fearful atmosphere. The darkness seemed to be getting thicker, covering every corner. Emily and her family now realized that they were not only facing strange phenomena, but also a life and death battle with a dark supernatural force. She looked around, her eyes anxious and determined. Everything had changed, and there was no room for weakness. Emily, speaking to her family, her voice determined. We cannot continue to live in fear. We must do something now. This darkness did not appear randomly. It wants us to disappear. Her father, who was always careful and rarely worried, now had to admit that what was happening was inexplicable. Together, they decided to find a way to decode the curse and exorcise the spirit that was haunting their family. However, every step they took made the atmosphere in the house increasingly gloomy and ambiguous. Emily's father said, voice tense, we have to learn about the history of this house, about everything that happened here. Otherwise, we will never get out. With the help of her grandmother's diary, Emily and her family try to find a way to break the curse. They study the strange signs in the house and gradually find clues. But every time they feel closer to the truth, strange events happen to stop them. Doors close automatically, furniture is moved, and shadowy figures appear in the darkness. And then, one night while Emily is going through the documents in the library, she suddenly remembers the events from before, the vague image of the man at the gas station. The familiar feeling of his face makes her shiver. Emily, whispering, realizing something. How did I not realize it sooner? He's not a random person. He's part of this conspiracy. Suddenly, everything became clear. The man from the gas station was not just a stranger, but part of the evil entity lurking in the darkness. He was the one who led her family into a trap, increasing the fear and uncertainty so that the darkness could invade their minds. Emily felt a cold wave wash over her body, and she knew that her family had only one chance to escape from this evil spirit. She hurried back to her family, determined to exorcise the spirit and break the curse. Emily, in a determined voice, "We have to face it and free this house now. There's no time left." The war with the darkness had begun, and no one in her family could go back. They must stand up and fight to protect themselves, so as not to be pushed into the darkness forever. The house has taken over. Only faint traces of the family that once lived in this house remained. Emily stood at the window, looking outside, her eyes filled with tears. Even though she had decided to leave the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was not over yet. The shadows in the house continued to linger, as if waiting for a chance to return. Emily's family had decided to leave the house after what they had experienced. However, as they were about to step through the threshold, a sound rang out from behind them, and the door automatically closed with a haunting creak. Darkness seemed to have completely taken over the house, overwhelming all the remaining faint lights in the space. Emily, surprised and panicked, turning back to look at the house one last time. Impossible! How could this be? Just as they were about to turn away, a cold wind blew through the hallway, carrying a whisper that echoed in the darkness. Emily and her family looked at each other in fear. Once again, the shadowy figures appeared, and the silence of the house had completely disappeared. Emily felt as if the world was collapsing around her. She realized that even if they left, even if the house was left behind, the ghosts of the past could not be left behind. The evil spirit still haunted, and the curse had not been lifted. Once again, they could only walk in confusion and despair, not knowing if they would one day escape these nightmares. Emily, whispering to herself, looking at the silent house, "Did we do right or wrong? Can we really leave the past behind?" Emily's family got into the car, and they drove away in silence, watching the house gradually disappear in the rear-view mirror. But in Emily's heart, there was one thing she could not deny, no matter where they went. The truth about the house and the dark spirits would always haunt them. Finally, a new curse has begun. Peace, if there ever was one, will no longer exist. And although they leave the house, its ghosts, along with unanswered questions, will haunt them forever. The story ends on a silent note, with the opening of an uncertain future, where Emily's family faces unknown threats from the past. The truth about the haunted house and the dark spirit is still not released, and the story is still waiting for an unpredictable ending.